The blood-red sunset cast long shadows over the parched earth as Lucas Pearson spotted her. A ghostly figure staggering along the horizon, her tattered dress billowing in the warm evening breeze. The year was 1879, and Durango, Colorado was still finding its footing as a proper town. The recent silver discoveries drawing hopeful souls from across the country. But this woman appeared to have journeyed through hell itself. Lucas pulled back on his horse's reins, squinting against the dying light. At 28, he'd seen his share of hardship on the frontier, but something about the way this woman moved erratic, almost frightened of her own shadow, stirred a protective instinct he couldn't ignore. "Easy now," he whispered to his horse, a sturdy palomino named Chance, as they approached slowly. The woman didn't seem to notice him at first. Her hair, the color of wheat fields in late summer, hung in matted tangles around a face that might have once been beautiful before the sun and whatever horrors she'd endured had taken their toll. When she finally sensed his presence, she froze like a cornered animal, her eyes wild with terror. "Madam," Lucas called softly, keeping his distance. "Are you in need of assistance?" She made no sound, but her body began to tremble. Lucas dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. His mother had taught him that kindness was the mark of a true man, and he intended to live by those words. "My name's Lucas Pearson," he said, his deep voice gentle as a mountain stream. "I have a ranch not far from here. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's lips parted, but instead of words, a whimper escaped. Then suddenly, as though some invisible thread had been cut, she collapsed into the dust. Lucas rushed forward, kneeling beside her crumpled form. Her skin burned with fever, and up close, he could see the scratches on her arms, the bruising around her neck. Someone had hurt this woman badly, and the thought made his jaw clench with anger. With careful hands, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. Chance whinnied nervously as Lucas settled her across the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "It'll be all right," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him through her unconsciousness. "You're safe now." The ride back to the Pearson ranch took nearly an hour. The modest homestead sat nestled in a valley, protected by towering pines and flanked by a crystal-clear stream. Lucas had built the main cabin himself after returning from the war, expanding it over the years as his cattle business grew. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, just like the man who owned it. His foreman, Henry Miller, rushed out when he heard the approaching hoofbeats. "What in tarnation?" the older man exclaimed, his gray-streaked beard quivering with concern. "Found her wandering near Eagle Pass," Lucas explained, carefully dismounting with the woman still cradled in his arms. "She's in bad shape, Henry. Fetch Martha from the cookhouse, would you?" Martha Davis had been the ranch's cook and housekeeper since Lucas' parents passed 5 years prior. At 62, she'd seen enough of life's cruelties to know when to ask questions and when to simply act. The stout woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron. One look at the unconscious woman and she was already barking orders. "Take her to the spare room, Lucas. I'll heat water and gather my herbs. Henry, ride into town for Doc Wallace, tell him it's urgent." Lucas carried the mysterious woman into the house, laying her gently on the bed in the small guest room. In the lamplight, the evidence of her ordeal was even more apparent, the dried blood in her hairline, the discoloration around her wrists suggesting she'd been bound. "What happened to you?" he whispered, a heaviness settling in his chest. Martha bustled in with a basin of water and clean cloths. "Out with you now," she ordered. "This poor girl needs tending, and it ain't proper for you to be here while I clean her up." Lucas nodded, backing out of the room. "Let me know if she wakes or if you need anything." For the next 2 hours, Lucas paced the length of his sitting room, occasionally pausing to pour himself a finger of whiskey that he didn't drink. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence, marking time as though nothing extraordinary had happened that day. Finally, Martha emerged, looking tired but resolute. "She's cleaned up and I've dressed her wounds," the woman reported. "Doc's arrived and is examining her now." "Will she be all right?" Lucas asked, setting down his untouched glass. Martha's expression softened. "Physically, she'll heal. But there's something else wrong, Lucas. She woke briefly while I was washing her face. The look in her eyes." She shook her head. It was like nothing was there. No recognition, no understanding. She made sounds but no proper words. Whatever happened to that girl broke more than just her body. Lucas absorbed this information with a grim nod. He'd seen similar vacant expressions during the war men whose minds had shattered under the weight of horrors too great to bear. Dr. Wallace emerged some time later, his weathered face grave as he closed the bedroom door behind him. "How is she?" Lucas asked immediately. The doctor sighed, removing his spectacles to rub the bridge of his nose. "She suffered a severe trauma, both physical and, I suspect, mental. There are defensive wounds on her hands, bruising consistent with assault. She's malnourished and dehydrated. But she'll recover? Her body will, with proper care," the doctor clarified. "Her mind is another matter entirely. She's experiencing what we call a dissociative state, a retreat of the consciousness from reality. It's a protective mechanism, you understand. When reality becomes too unbearable, the mind sometimes simply withdraws." Lucas' brow furrowed. "Will she ever come back to herself?" "Perhaps, with time and gentle care. Some do, some don't." The doctor replaced his glasses. "She needs rest now, and when she wakes, simple foods, broth, soft bread. Nothing overwhelming. Keep your voice low, movements slow. Anything startling could worsen her condition." "Has she said anything? Do we know who she is?" Lucas asked. Dr. Wallace shook his head. "Not a word. No identification on her either. She's a complete mystery, I'm afraid." After the doctor left, with a promise to return in 2 days, Lucas approached the spare room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see the woman lying still beneath the quilt. Her clean hair spread across the pillow like spun gold. Martha appeared at his side with a bowl of broth. "You should get some sleep, Lucas. I'll sit with her through the night." "No," he said quietly. "You've done enough, Martha. Get some rest. I'll take the first watch." The older woman studied him for a moment, then handed him the bowl. "Suit yourself. Try to get her to take a few spoonfuls if she wakes. I've left a bell on the nightstand ring if you need me." Lucas entered the room silently, settling into the chair beside the bed. The woman's face was peaceful in sleep, almost childlike in its vulnerability. Who had she been before whatever terrible events had led her to his land? Did she have family searching for her? As midnight approached, the woman began to stir, small whimpers escaping her lips. Her head tossed from side to side, and her fingers clutched at the quilt. Lucas leaned forward, speaking in the gentle tone he used with spooked horses. "You're safe," he murmured. "No one will hurt you here." Her eyes flew open, wide with panic. She scrambled backward until she hit the headboard, drawing her knees to her chest in a protective gesture that broke Lucas' heart. "It's all right," he continued softly. "My name is Lucas Pearson. You're at my ranch near Durango. I found you out on the plains and brought you here to recover." The woman stared at him, her blue eyes reflecting no comprehension, only fear. Lucas noticed how she flinched when he raised his hand to indicate the room around them, and he immediately lowered it, keeping his palms open and visible. "Would you like some broth?" he asked, gesturing to the bowl. "It might help your strength." No response came, but her gaze flickered to the steaming bowl. Lucas picked it up and took a spoonful himself, swallowing it deliberately. "See? It's good. Martha makes the best broth in Colorado territory." Slowly, cautiously, he offered her a spoonful. To his surprise, she leaned forward slightly, allowing him to feed her. Her eyes never left his face as she swallowed, as though searching for signs of deception. "That's good," he encouraged. "Just a little more." They continued this way until half the bowl was empty, a victory that felt monumental. When she turned her face away, clearly finished, Lucas set the bowl aside. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently. "Something I can call you?" The woman's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. After several attempts, she closed her mouth, distress evident in her expression. "That's all right," Lucas soothed. "We don't need to figure everything out tonight. You're tired, and you need rest to heal." As he spoke, her eyelids began to droop, the exhaustion of her ordeal claiming her once more. Lucas remained in the chair, watching over her until her breathing deepened into sleep. "Whoever you are," he whispered to the sleeping woman, "you're not alone anymore." For 3 days, the mysterious woman drifted in and out of consciousness. During her waking moments, Lucas or Martha would coax small amounts of food into her, speaking in gentle tones about inconsequential things: the weather, the antics of the ranch hands, Martha's recipes. If the woman understood any of it, she gave no indication, but she no longer recoiled when Lucas approached, which he counted as progress. On the 4th morning, Lucas entered her room to find her sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. The early sunlight caught in her hair, revealing strands of copper among the gold that he hadn't noticed before. "Good morning," he said quietly, setting down a tray with porridge and tea. She turned to look at him, and for the first time her eyes seemed focused, truly seeing him rather than looking through him in terror. "I thought we might try something different today," Lucas continued, pulling the chair closer to her bedside. "Martha mentioned you might like to wash your face with fresh water, maybe brush your hair." He indicated the brush he'd placed on the tray, his mother's old silver-backed brush that he'd kept all these years. The woman's gaze fell to the brush, and something flickered across her face recognition. Perhaps. Slowly, her hand reached out, trembling slightly as her fingers closed around the handle. For several moments, she simply held it, running her thumb over the ornate silver. Then, with movements that seemed to require immense concentration, she raised it to her tangled hair. The brush caught immediately in the knots, causing her to wince. Lucas hesitated, then spoke gently. "May I help you?" She froze, the brush still caught in her hair. Her eyes met his, uncertain. "I used to help my mother brush her hair when she was ill," he explained, keeping his voice low and even. "I promised to be careful." After what seemed an eternity, she extended the brush toward him, a silent permission that felt like the most precious gift. Lucas moved his chair behind her, taking the brush with reverent care. Starting at the ends of her hair, he worked slowly, methodically untangling each section before moving higher. All the while, he spoke to her in that same gentle cadence. "The ranch has been in my family for nearly 15 years now. My father brought us here from Tennessee after the war. He had big dreams for this land." Lucas carefully worked through a particularly stubborn knot. "We started with just 20 head of cattle and this cabin, which was half the size it is now. Every summer, we'd add another room or a new fence line." As he spoke of simple, safe things: cattle breeding, the changing seasons, his favorite fishing spot along the stream, he felt the tension gradually leaving her shoulders. By the time he'd brushed her hair to a golden sheen, she was sitting more naturally, her posture less defensive. "There," he said, moving back to his original position. Much better. The woman raised her hand to touch her hair, a look of faint surprise crossing her features. Then, to Lucas' astonishment, her lips curved in the barest hint of a smile gone so quickly, he might have imagined it, except for the warmth that spread through his chest at the sight. "Would you like to try some porridge?" he asked, indicating the bowl that had grown cold during their impromptu grooming session. She nodded, a small, deliberate movement that represented the first clear communication she'd offered. Lucas felt ridiculously proud, as though she'd performed some remarkable feat. As the days passed, small changes emerged in the woman's behavior. She began to respond to simple questions with nods or shakes of her head. She would follow Lucas or Martha with her eyes when they moved around the room. One afternoon, she even stood on shaky legs and walked to the window, where she spent hours watching the ranch hands at work in the distance. Dr. Wallace visited again and pronounced her physical recovery remarkable, though he remained concerned about her silence and apparent memory loss. "Keep doing what you're doing," he advised Lucas. "Your patience may be the best medicine for her now." On the 10th day of her stay, Lucas brought her a simple dress that Martha had altered from one of his mother's old garments. "I thought you might like a change from nightgowns," he explained, laying the sage green cotton dress across the foot of the bed. "And perhaps, if you're feeling strong enough, you might enjoy sitting on the porch this afternoon. The weather's fine today." The woman touched the dress with careful fingers, then looked at Lucas with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Was it gratitude? Apprehension? After a moment, she nodded. "I'll have Martha come help you dress," he said, backing toward the door. "Take your time. There's no rush." An hour later, Martha led the woman onto the front porch where Lucas waited in one of the 2 rocking chairs he'd carried out. The transformation was striking. Washed and dressed, her hair loosely braided, some color returning to her cheeks, she looked almost like any young woman one might pass on the streets of Durango. Only her eyes, with their haunted depth, betrayed her ordeal. Lucas stood immediately, offering her his arm for support. To his surprise, she accepted it, her small hand resting lightly on his forearm as he guided her to a chair. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the distant figures of ranch hands moving cattle across the western pasture. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, and somewhere nearby, a meadowlark trilled its distinctive song. "That's a yellow-breasted meadowlark," Lucas commented. "They return every spring like clockwork. My mother used to say their song was God's way of announcing winter was truly over." The woman turned her face toward the sound, listening intently. Then she closed her eyes, her features softening as the bird continued its melody. "Do you like music?" Lucas asked, seizing on her apparent interest. She opened her eyes and nodded, the movement more definitive than before. "I have an old fiddle inside," he said. "I'm not very skilled, but I know a few tunes my father taught me. Would you like to hear one sometime?" Another nod, accompanied by the faintest quirk of her lips, not quite a smile, but close. Lucas felt unreasonably pleased by this small victory. "Well then, I'll have to practice so I don't offend your ears." They continued their silent vigil as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. It was only when Martha called them in for supper that Lucas realized they'd spent nearly 2 hours simply sitting together, and it had been the most peaceful afternoon he'd experienced in years. That night, for the first time, the woman joined Lucas and Martha at the kitchen table for dinner. She ate carefully, her movements deliberate, but she managed a full plate of Martha's beef stew and even a small piece of cornbread. Lucas couldn't help noticing how her gaze continually returned to a small vase of wildflowers Martha had placed at the center of the table. After dinner, when Martha had retired to her room and Lucas was preparing to escort the woman back to her bedroom, he plucked a single purple flower from the vase and offered it to her. It's called a wild iris, he explained. They grow down by the creek. There will be many more blooming soon if you'd like to see them. She accepted the flower with both hands, cradling it as though it were made of glass. For a long moment, she simply stared at it, her fingers gently tracing the delicate petals. Then she raised it to her face, inhaling its subtle fragrance. "Beautiful," she whispered, the word so faint Lucas almost missed it. He froze, scarcely daring to breathe lest he shatter this miraculous moment. "Yes," he agreed softly. "Beautiful." Her eyes met his, a flicker of surprise in them, as though she hadn't realized she'd spoken aloud. Lucas smiled encouragingly but asked no questions, made no demands for more. This single word was enough a treasure he would safeguard. "Would you like to take it with you?" he asked, nodding toward the flower. She nodded, still cradling the iris in her palms. "I'll find a small glass for it," he offered, fetching a shot glass from a cabinet. He filled it with water and placed it on the nightstand in her room. "There, your own little piece of the Colorado spring." Before leaving her for the night, Lucas paused at the doorway. "Sleep well," he said, as he did each evening. "But tonight," he added, "I'm glad you're finding your voice again." The woman placed the iris in the makeshift vase, arranging it with careful attention. Then she looked up at Lucas, her blue eyes clearer than he'd yet seen them. "Thank you," she said, the two words rough from disuse but unmistakable. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. "You're welcome," he managed, before quietly closing the door. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Two simple words, yet they represented a monumental step, a sign that the woman who had wandered onto his land, broken in body and spirit, was finding her way back to herself. The next morning, Lucas found Martha in a state of barely contained excitement. "She spoke to me," the older woman whispered urgently. "Asked if she could help with breakfast." Full sentences, Lucas. Her voice is still weak, but she's talking. Lucas felt a surge of joy tinged with an inexplicable apprehension. Did she say anything about herself? Her name? Where she's from? Martha shook her head. "No, nothing like that. When I asked what I should call her, she just looked confused, then frightened. I changed the subject quick as I could." In the kitchen, the woman sat at the table, carefully slicing apples under Martha's direction. She looked up when Lucas entered, offering a tentative smile that transformed her face. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, fighting the urge to grin like a fool. "I hear you've been recruited as Martha's assistant chef." She nodded, gesturing to the apple slices. "For pie." "My favorite," Lucas said, pouring himself coffee. "You're in for a treat. Martha's apple pie is famous throughout the county." As they worked together, the atmosphere in the kitchen felt almost normal, as though this arrangement had existed for years rather than days. The woman spoke little, but when she did, her words were clear and deliberate, though she never volunteered information about herself. After breakfast, Lucas suggested a short walk, thinking the fresh air and gentle exercise might be beneficial. The woman readily agreed, and soon they were strolling along the path toward the creek, moving at a leisurely pace to accommodate her still recovering strength. The day was perfect, blue skies dotted with puffy white clouds, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Lucas pointed out various landmarks: the old lightning-struck tree where he'd built a fort as a boy, the bend in the creek where the trout were particularly plentiful, the distant ridge where wild mustangs sometimes appeared at dawn. The woman listened attentively, occasionally asking simple questions. Her voice grew stronger with use, a melodic quality emerging that Lucas found himself eager to hear. At the creek, they sat on a fallen log, watching the clear water tumble over smooth stones. As promised, wild irises bloomed along the banks, their purple blossoms nodding in the breeze. "You were right," she said, gazing at the flowers. "So many. Would you like to pick some for your room?" Lucas offered. She nodded, and together they gathered a small bouquet. As she bent to select a particularly vibrant bloom, a lock of golden hair fell across her face. Without thinking, Lucas reached out to tuck it behind her ear. She stiffened at his touch, her eyes widening with sudden fear. Lucas immediately withdrew his hand, cursing his thoughtlessness. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you." The woman remained frozen for a moment, then deliberately relaxed her posture, though her knuckles were white around the stems of the flowers she held. "It's all right," she whispered, though clearly it wasn't. Lucas maintained a careful distance as they walked back to the ranch, internally berating himself for his carelessness. The easy camaraderie of the morning had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that felt like a significant setback. Back at the house, the woman retreated to her room with the flowers, and Lucas sought out Martha in the kitchen. "I made a mistake," he admitted, recounting the incident at the creek. "I touched her without warning, and she—" "You frightened her," Martha concluded, her expression sympathetic. "It's not your fault, Lucas. That girl has been through something terrible, something that's made her fear a man's touch. It'll take time for her to trust again." "But she was doing so well," Lucas said, frustration evident in his voice. Smiling then, "I ruined it with one thoughtless gesture." Martha patted his arm. "You didn't ruin anything. Progress isn't a straight line, especially when it comes to healing the mind. Give her space, but don't retreat entirely. She needs to learn that one frightening moment doesn't mean danger will follow." Taking Martha's advice, Lucas kept his distance for the remainder of the day, though he made sure to speak normally to the woman when their paths crossed. By supper time, some of the tension had dissipated, though she remained quieter than she had been at breakfast. That night, Lucas retreated to the front porch with his father's old fiddle, determined to practice as he'd promised. He played softly, working through the simple tunes he remembered: Barbara Allen, Shenandoah, Red River Valley, his fingers gradually recalling the patterns they'd learned long ago. He was midway through Wayfaring Stranger when he sensed a presence behind him. Turning, he found the woman standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "Don't stop," she said quietly. Lucas nodded, returning to the haunting melody. When he finished, he lowered the fiddle and turned to find the woman with tears streaming down her face. Alarmed, he set aside the instrument. "I'm sorry, was it that terrible?" She shook her head, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Beautiful," she whispered. "It reminded me." When she didn't continue, Lucas gently prompted, "Reminded you of what?" "I don't know," she said, frustration evident in her voice. Someone. It's like trying to catch smoke." It was the most she'd said about her past since arriving, and Lucas felt a surge of hope. "Would you like to sit?" he offered, indicating the empty rocking chair beside his own. She hesitated only briefly before joining him, keeping the shawl wrapped tightly around her slender frame. "The doctor says your memories might return in pieces," Lucas said carefully. "Don't try to force them. They'll come when they're ready." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds: crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft creaking of the rocking chairs. "I dream of fire," she said suddenly, her voice so low Lucas had to lean forward to hear her. "And screaming. I'm running, always running. But I don't know from what or toward where." Her hands trembled in her lap. "Sometimes I think not remembering is a mercy." Lucas resisted the urge to take her hand, mindful of their earlier encounter. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but carrying an unnamed fear can be its own burden." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "You've seen terrible things too," she observed. Not a question but a recognition. Lucas nodded. "I fought in the war the last 2 years of it. Saw things no man should see. Did things I wish I could forget." He rarely spoke of this with anyone, but something about her perception, her own unnamed trauma, made sharing easier. "For a long time after, I couldn't sleep without nightmares. Couldn't bear loud noises or crowds." "How did you heal?" she asked, her focus entirely on him. Lucas considered this. "Slowly, by remembering that there's still beauty in the world alongside the ugliness. By allowing myself to feel joy again, even when it seemed like a betrayal of all I'd witnessed." He gestured toward the vast star-filled sky above them. "By finding peace in moments like this." She followed his gaze upward, taking in the brilliant canopy of stars. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the tension of the day's earlier misstep gradually dissolving. "I think," she said finally, her voice steadier than before, "I would like to try." "Try what?" Lucas asked. "To remember joy," she answered simply. The days that followed took on a gentle rhythm. Each morning, the woman helped Martha with breakfast preparations. Afterward, if weather permitted, she and Lucas would walk the property, venturing a little farther each day as her strength returned. During these walks, Lucas would share stories of the land and his life, while she listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or making observations that revealed a keen intelligence. In the afternoons, she often sat on the porch with mending Martha had taught her or a book from Lucas' modest library. Her reading skills were excellent, another clue to her mysterious past, and she devoured the handful of novels and poetry collections with evident pleasure. Evenings were spent around the fireplace, where Lucas would sometimes play the fiddle, his skill improving with regular practice, or read aloud while the women worked on handcrafts. Sometimes Henry or one of the other ranch hands would join them, bringing news from town or tales of the day's work. Through it all, the woman's voice grew stronger, her personality gradually emerging from the fearful shell that had encased it. She revealed a subtle wit, a fondness for wildflowers, and a surprising knowledge of astronomy, though she couldn't explain how she knew the constellations she pointed out one clear night. What she didn't reveal was her name or any concrete details about her past. Sometimes a sound or smell would trigger a reaction. The clanging of the dinner bell once sent her into a trembling panic. The scent of pipe tobacco caused her to weep silently, but these moments passed without bringing clarity to her memories. Lucas found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just out of compassion or curiosity, but genuine admiration. Her resilience astounded him. Her determination to reclaim her life despite whatever horrors had shattered it moved him deeply. One evening in late May, nearly a month after Lucas had found her wandering the plains, they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset. The woman had taken to wearing her hair in a simple braid, with small wildflowers woven through it, a style that softened her features and highlighted the healthy glow that had returned to her skin. "I should have a name," she said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. Lucas turned to her, surprised by the declaration. "You want to choose a name for yourself?" She nodded, her expression resolute. "I can't keep being the woman or she forever. If my real name is lost to me for now, I need something to be called." "What name would you like?" Lucas asked, curious about her choice. She considered for a moment, watching as the sun dipped below the distant mountains, casting a golden glow across the land. "Beatrice," she decided. "It means bringer of joy or blessed." A small smile touched her lips. "It feels right somehow." "Beatrice," Lucas repeated, testing the name. It suited her, elegant but strong. "Do you want a surname as well?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. One step at a time." "Well then, Beatrice," Lucas said. It's a pleasure to officially make your acquaintance. She laughed, a sound he'd heard only rarely in their time together, and one he immediately wished to hear again. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Pearson, she replied, with a playful formality that warmed his heart. Lucas, he corrected gently. Please. Lucas, she echoed, her blue eyes meeting his with newfound confidence. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond caretaker and patient, beyond the circumstance that had brought them together. In naming herself, Beatrice had claimed agency over her present, regardless of her past. The following day, Lucas rode into Durango with Henry to purchase supplies and inquire about any reports of missing women matching Beatrice's description. The town had grown considerably since the arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad the year before, with new businesses springing up along Main Street and construction underway for more permanent structures to replace the hasty wooden buildings of the initial settlement. At the sheriff's office, Lucas found Bill Thompson, a grizzled former cavalry officer who'd taken the badge after deciding military life no longer suited him. Can't say I've heard of any missing women fitting that description, the sheriff said after listening to Lucas' carefully worded inquiry. But I'll keep my ear to the ground. Where'd you say you found her? Out near Eagle Pass, Lucas replied. She was in bad shape, injured, disoriented. Doc Wallace has been treating her. Sheriff Thompson scratched his beard thoughtfully. Could have been attacked by bandits, I suppose. There have been reports of a gang operating out of the San Juan Mountains, hitting travelers and isolated homesteads, led by a nasty piece of work named Silas Blackburn. Lucas felt a chill at the name, though he couldn't say why. What do you know about them? Not enough to catch him, Thompson admitted with frustration. They're careful, move around a lot. Word is Blackburn's got a particular hatred for the railroad, blames it for taking his land or some such grievance. They've raided a couple of work camps, killed some laborers. Lucas nodded grimly. If you hear anything about a missing woman, or any activity from this gang near my ranch, I'd appreciate knowing about it. Course, the sheriff agreed. And Pearson, you be careful. If this woman was attacked by Blackburn's men, they might come looking to finish what they started. Or silence a witness. The warning followed Lucas as he completed his errands and headed back to the ranch. He'd been so focused on Beatrice's recovery that he hadn't fully considered the potential danger. What if whoever had hurt her was still looking for her? His concern must have shown on his face when he returned, for Beatrice immediately sensed something was wrong. Did something happen in town? She asked as he unloaded supplies from the wagon. Lucas hesitated, not wanting to frighten her but unwilling to lie. I spoke with the sheriff about your situation, he said carefully. He hadn't heard of any missing women, but he mentioned there's a gang operating in the area. They've attacked travelers and isolated homesteads. Beatrice went very still, her face paling. A gang, she repeated, the word barely audible. It might have nothing to do with what happened to you, Lucas added quickly. But I think we should be cautious. I've asked the hands to keep a sharper lookout, and I'll be more diligent about locking up at night. She nodded absently, her gaze now fixed on the distant mountains. Silas, she whispered suddenly, her body beginning to tremble. Lucas set down the sack of flour he'd been carrying. What did you say? Silas? She repeated, louder now, her eyes widening with fear. His name was Silas. Lucas stepped closer, careful to maintain enough distance that she wouldn't feel threatened. Do you remember something, Beatrice? Her hand went to her throat, fingers tracing the now faded bruises. He had a beard, dark eyes. He laughed when. She broke off, a small sound of distress escaping her lips. It's all right, Lucas soothed. You don't have to remember everything at once. But Beatrice was shaking her head, agitation building. There was fire, so much fire. people screaming. He said they deserved it, that progress was a disease that needed to be purged. Her breathing quickened, becoming erratic. My father tried to stop them. He had a shotgun, but there were too many. They shot him, and then they... Her knees buckled. Lucas caught her before she hit the ground, easing her onto the porch steps. "Breathe, Beatrice," he instructed gently. "Just breathe." For several minutes, they sat there, Lucas murmuring reassurances while Beatrice fought to control her breathing. When she finally spoke again, her voice was hollow. "My name is Beatrice Newell," she said. "My father was Edward Newell, the construction foreman for the western extension of the Denver and Rio Grande. We lived in a camp near the mountains. 2 weeks ago, or maybe longer, Blackburn and his men attacked. They killed the workers, burned the camp. My father died trying to protect me." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Blackburn took me with them. Said I'd serve as an example to others who brought corruption to the frontier." Lucas felt sick with rage at what she'd endured, but kept his voice steady. "How did you escape?" "They were drinking one night. The man guarding me fell asleep. I took his knife, cut my bindings, and ran." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I ran for days, hiding during daylight, moving at night. I had no idea where I was going. Eventually, I couldn't remember why I was running or from what. Everything just faded away." The full weight of her story settled between them like a physical presence. Lucas thought of her injuries, the terror in her eyes when he'd found her, the way she still flinched at sudden movements. The pieces fit together into a horrific picture. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "Blackburn and his men won't find you here, and if they try..." He left the threat unfinished. Beatrice looked up at him, her blue eyes clear despite the tears. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day." "I'm grateful I did," he replied simply. That evening, Lucas sent Henry into town with a message for Sheriff Thompson, relating what Beatrice had remembered. Then he gathered his ranch hands and explained the situation, establishing a watch rotation and defensive measures should Blackburn's gang approach the property. Beatrice seemed both relieved and exhausted by the return of her memories. She retired early, but when Martha checked on her before turning in herself, she found the younger woman sitting by the window, staring out into the darkness. "Can't sleep, child?" Martha asked gently. Beatrice shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it all happening again." Martha sat beside her, patting her hand. "That's natural after what you've been through. The memories are fresh again. Raw. But they won't always feel so overwhelming." "How do you know?" Beatrice asked, a note of desperation in her voice. "Because I've seen it before," Martha replied. "My brother came back from the war much like you, broken by what he'd witnessed, haunted by nightmares. For a time, we thought he'd never find peace. But slowly, with patience and love, he did." "What happened to him?" Martha smiled sadly. "He lives up in Wyoming now, has a wife, 3 children. Still has days where the memories creep in, but they don't control him anymore." Beatrice considered this. When I couldn't remember, there was a strange peace in the emptiness. Now I feel everything, the grief, the fear, the anger." "Feeling is living," Martha said simply. "Painful as it may be, it means you're healing." The next morning, Sheriff Thompson arrived at the ranch, accompanied by 2 deputies. Beatrice met with them in the sitting room, Lucas at her side as she recounted what she remembered of the attack and her captivity. She spoke clearly, her composure remarkable given the nature of her testimony, though Lucas noticed how tightly her hands were clasped in her lap. "Miss Newell," the sheriff said when she'd finished, "your account matches reports we've received from other witnesses. Blackburn's gang has been escalating their attacks on railroad operations. What you've told us about their camp location is valuable intelligence. What will you do now? Lucas asked. We're organizing a posse, Thompson replied. The railroad company has offered a substantial reward for Blackburn's capture, and the territorial governor has authorized additional resources. With Miss Newell's information, we have a fighting chance of finding their hideout. I want to help, Beatrice said firmly. Beatrice, no, Lucas objected immediately. It's too dangerous. She turned to him, her expression resolute. These men murdered my father and dozens of innocent workers. She faltered briefly, then continued. They took everything from me. I need to see justice done. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat uncomfortably. We won't be asking Miss Newell to join the posse, of course. But having her identify Blackburn and his men once captured would be invaluable for the trial. If there is a trial, Lucas pointed out, posses aren't known for bringing outlaws back alive. We'll do our best, Thompson promised, though his tone suggested he wouldn't be heartbroken if Blackburn resisted arrest. After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Lucas found Beatrice on the porch, staring at the mountains with a troubled expression. I don't like the idea of you being involved in this at all, he said, leaning against the railing. These men are dangerous. They already know what I look like, Lucas, she pointed out. If they're not captured, I'll never truly be safe. Neither will anyone around me. The implication hung in the air between them. She was thinking about removing the threat she represented from his doorstep. This is your home for as long as you want it to be, Lucas said firmly. I'm not afraid of Blackburn or his men. Beatrice's expression softened. You've done so much for me already. And I'd do it all again, he replied, surprising himself with the intensity of his conviction. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Beatrice stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm, a gesture that would have been impossible for her just weeks ago. Thank you for helping me remember who I am, she said softly. Even the painful parts. Lucas covered her hand with his own. You did the hard work yourself. I just provided a safe place for you to do it. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Lucas turned to see Henry riding hard toward the house, dust rising behind him. Riders coming, the foreman called as he approached. 6 men heavily armed, approaching from the South Ridge. Lucas's mind raced. The South Ridge provided a view of the entire ranch. Anyone watching from there could have seen the sheriff's visit. Get inside, he told Beatrice urgently. Tell Martha what's happening. She knows where the shotgun is kept. What about you? Beatrice asked, fear evident in her voice. I'll join the men, make sure everything's secure. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Go now. As Beatrice hurried inside, Lucas strode to meet Henry, who had already begun organizing the ranch hands. The men were positioning themselves strategically around the property, rifles at the ready. Could be nothing, Henry said, though his expression belied his words. Could be the Jenkins brothers from over the ridge, though they usually approach from the east. Not taking any chances, Lucas replied grimly, checking his Winchester repeater. If it is Blackburn's men, they'll find we're not easy targets. They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, 6 riders appeared at the edge of the property, moving slowly but deliberately toward the main house. Through his field glasses, Lucas could make out hard-faced men, each bearing multiple weapons. The leader, a tall man with a black beard and a distinctive red bandana, sat his horse with the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others. That'll be Blackburn, Lucas muttered to Henry. Keep the men steady. Don't fire unless I give the word or they make aggressive moves. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, just beyond effective shotgun range but well within rifle distance. Blackburn raised his hand in a mocking greeting. "Hello, the house," he called, his voice carrying easily across the open ground. "We're looking for someone who might have wandered this way." A young woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, ran off before we could see her safely home. Lucas stepped forward, rifle held casually but ready. "No strangers here," he replied evenly. "Just me and my ranch hands." Blackburn's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Now that's interesting, because we heard tell from a friendly bartender in Durango that a rancher named Pearson had taken in just such a woman. Found her wandering," he said. Lucas silently cursed the town gossip. "You've been misinformed." "Have I?" Blackburn's gaze swept the property, lingering on the main house. "Then you won't mind if we have a look around, for thoroughness' sake." "This is private property," Lucas said firmly, "and you're not welcome here. I suggest you ride on before there's trouble." Blackburn laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Trouble? Friend, you don't know what trouble is." His hand drifted toward his holster. "Last chance to cooperate. Send out the Newell girl and we'll be on our way. Keep her, and we burn this pretty ranch to the ground." Before Lucas could respond, the front door of the house opened. Beatrice stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand. Even from a distance, Lucas could see she was trembling, but her stance was determined. "I'm right here, Silas," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "No need to threaten these good people on my account. Beatrice, get back inside." Lucas hissed, but she ignored him. Blackburn's expression shifted to one of malicious pleasure. Well, the construction foreman's daughter lives after all. You led us on quite a chase, girl. Let these people be," Beatrice continued. "Your quarrel is with me and the railroad. She's got spirit. I'll give her that," Blackburn said to his companions. Then, to Beatrice, "You know what happens to women who defy me. Your father's not here to protect you this time." Lucas had heard enough. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Blackburn. "You're not taking her anywhere. This is your last warning." Tension crackled in the air as both sides assessed their options. Lucas knew his 6 ranch hands were good men, but they weren't gunfighters. Against Blackburn's hardened outlaws, the outcome of a shootout was uncertain at best. The standoff might have erupted into violence then and there if not for the unexpected sound of multiple horses approaching from the east. All eyes turned to see Sheriff Thompson leading a dozen armed men onto the property, their rifles already drawn. "Silas Blackburn," the sheriff called, "you and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender peacefully." Blackburn's face contorted with rage. For a heart-stopping moment, Lucas thought he might order his men to fight anyway, but self-preservation apparently outweighed his desire for revenge. With a vicious curse, he slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he spat, his gaze fixed on Beatrice. "Not by a long shot." One by one, Blackburn and his men disarmed, though their expressions promised retribution. The deputies moved in to bind their hands and lead them away. Sheriff Thompson approached Lucas, tipping his hat. "Figured they might head this way after your message. Decided to follow at a distance rather than tip our hand." "Good timing," Lucas acknowledged, his heart still racing from the confrontation. "Miss Newell," the sheriff called to Beatrice, who remained on the porch, the shotgun now lowered. "We'll need your formal statement, but it can wait until tomorrow. These men won't trouble you again." Beatrice nodded, her face pale but composed. Only when the sheriff and his prisoners had departed did she finally set down the weapon and sink onto the porch steps, her strength seemingly deserting her all at once. Lucas hurried to her side, kneeling before her. "That was incredibly brave," he said softly, "and incredibly foolish. He could have shot you where you stood." I couldn't let him threaten you and your ranch, she replied, her voice shaking. Not after everything you've done for me. Something fierce and protective surged through Lucas as he looked at her, this woman who had endured unimaginable horror yet found the courage to confront her tormentor. We protect each other, he said simply. That's what people who care about each other do. Beatrice met his gaze, a wealth of unspoken emotion in her blue eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched his face, a gentle contact that sent warmth spreading through him. Yes, she agreed softly. We do. In the days that followed, a sense of normality gradually returned to the ranch. Beatrice provided her formal statement to the sheriff, learning in the process that Blackburn and his men would be transported to Denver for trial on multiple counts of murder, arson, and other crimes. The evidence against them was overwhelming. They would likely hang before year's end. With the immediate threat removed, Beatrice faced a new challenge, determining her future. Her father was gone, their home destroyed. The railroad company, upon learning of her survival, offered compensation for her father's service and death, providing her with financial independence she hadn't expected. I could go anywhere, she told Lucas one evening as they walked along the creek. June had arrived in full glory, the landscape lush with wildflowers and the cottonwoods heavy with fresh green leaves. Denver, San Francisco, even back east to Boston where my mother's family lives. Lucas felt his heart constrict at the thought of her leaving, though he kept his expression neutral. What do you want to do? Beatrice bent to examine a cluster of columbines, their blue and white blossoms nodding in the gentle breeze. I'm not sure, she admitted. For so long, I was just trying to survive each day. Now that I can think about the future. She straightened, turning to face him. What would you do if you were me? The question caught him off guard. I couldn't presume to advise you on such a personal decision. I'm asking for your opinion, Lucas, not your advice. He considered her request seriously. I would go where I felt safe, he said finally. Where I could build a life that honored those I'd lost without being defined by their absence. Where I could find purpose and joy. The word hung between them, a reminder of their conversation on the porch weeks earlier. I've been thinking about joy a lot lately, Beatrice said softly. What brings it, what takes it away? During those dark days with Blackburn, I thought I'd never feel it again. Then when my mind broke, I couldn't feel anything at all, not joy, not sorrow, nothing. She moved closer to Lucas, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes. But you were patient. You spoke softly, treated me with kindness when I was nothing but a burden. You helped me remember not just who I was, but that life could be beautiful again. Lucas shook his head. You were never a burden, Beatrice. Even when you had to spoon-feed me broth? She asked with a small smile. Even then, he affirmed. Especially then. The tenderness in his voice must have betrayed deeper feelings, for Beatrice's expression softened. Lucas, she said quietly, I think I found where I feel safe, where I can honor my father's memory while building something new, where I've already begun to find joy again. Hope rose in Lucas' chest, but he needed to be certain. Are you saying you want to stay in Durango? I'm saying I want to stay here, with you. Her cheeks flushed pink, but her gaze remained steady. If you'll have me. The world seemed to still around them as Lucas absorbed her words. For weeks, he'd been careful not to hope for this, not to presume that her gratitude might evolve into something more. Now, faced with the reality of her confession, he found himself momentarily speechless. Beatrice, he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. Nothing would make me happier. But I need to be sure this is truly what you want, not what you think you owe me. I know my own mind, Lucas Pearson, she replied with a hint of the spirit that had emerged as she healed. And my own heart. What I feel for you has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with the man you are, kind, honorable, patient. She took a deep breath. I love you. I think perhaps I began loving you before I even remembered my own name. The simple declaration broke something open inside Lucas, releasing emotions he'd held carefully in check for weeks. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. I love you too, he said, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling behind them. I've been falling in love with you since the day I found you. Through every step of your healing, every glimpse of the remarkable woman you are. Beatrice's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Then it seems we're in agreement. It seems we are, Lucas replied, his own smile matching hers. With gentle deliberation, he raised one hand to her cheek, giving her time to pull away if his touch triggered fear. But Beatrice didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his palm, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them again, they held an invitation Lucas couldn't resist. Slowly, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to his eyes. Her arms slipped around his neck as she responded with a sweetness that made his heart soar. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Build a life with me here. Yes, Beatrice answered simply. Yes to all of it. Summer yielded to autumn, and autumn to a winter that blanketed the ranch in pristine snow. By December, Beatrice had fully integrated herself into ranch life, working alongside Martha in managing the household and accompanying Lucas to town for business when weather permitted. The ranch hands, initially awkward around the refined young woman, had gradually accepted her as a permanent fixture, especially after she proved herself capable of making the best apple pies west of the Mississippi, according to Henry's enthusiastic assessment. On Christmas Eve, with pine boughs decorating the mantelpiece and candles casting a warm glow throughout the house, Lucas and Beatrice were married in a small ceremony attended by their closest friends. Martha wept openly, declaring it the happiest day since Lucas' parents had wed in the same spot 29 years earlier. Sheriff Thompson attended, bringing news that Blackburn and 3 of his men had indeed been hanged in Denver the previous month. Their reign of terror permanently ended. The information allowed Beatrice to close that dark chapter of her life with finality. Though Lucas knew she still occasionally woke from nightmares, reaching for him in the darkness until his presence reassured her. As winter gradually released its grip on the land, giving way to the first tentative signs of spring, Lucas found Beatrice one morning standing on the porch, gazing at the distant mountains with a thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Pearson?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. She smiled at the name still new enough to bring a flush of pleasure to her cheeks. "I was thinking about cycles," she replied. "How the seasons change, how life continues despite everything. A year ago, I was helping my father with the railroad camp, never imagining how completely my world would change." Lucas wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "Regrets? About us? Never." She leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "But I've been thinking about my father, about what he hoped for me. He always wanted me to be educated, independent. He encouraged my interest in books, in learning." She hesitated, then continued. "I've been corresponding with the schoolmaster in Durango. They're in need of an assistant teacher for the growing number of children." Lucas considered this. "You want to teach? A few days a week, perhaps. Not enough to neglect my responsibilities here. But..." She looked up at him, a familiar determination in her eyes. "I think I could do some good, Lucas. Help children learn, grow. Create something positive from all this." Lucas felt a surge of pride in this remarkable woman who had overcome so much. "I think it's a wonderful idea. Your father would be proud. You don't mind?" Some men might not want their wives working outside the home. Beatrice, he said seriously, I fell in love with your spirit as much as your heart. I would never ask you to be less than who you are. Her smile was radiant. Thank you. She paused, a mischievous glint appearing in her eyes. Besides, I might need the practice. Practice? Lucas echoed, confusion evident in his tone. Beatrice took his hand and placed it gently against her abdomen. For our own children, or at least the first one, who should arrive by late summer, according to Martha's calculations. For the second time in their relationship, Beatrice rendered Lucas completely speechless. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. A baby? We're going to have a baby? She nodded, joy illuminating her face. A new life, Lucas. One we created together. Lucas let out a whoop of excitement that startled the chickens in the nearby yard, then lifted Beatrice into his arms and spun her around, her laughter joining his in the clear morning air. Be careful, she protested through her giggles. I'm delicate now, remember? He set her down immediately, his expression comically serious. Of course, you'll need rest and special foods, and Beatrice silenced him with a kiss. What I need, she said when they parted, is exactly what you've always given me. Love, patience, and the freedom to be myself, even as I become someone new again. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a broken woman wandering the plains to the confident, loving wife who now carried his child. When I found you that day, he said softly, I had no idea I was finding my whole future, and when you spoke to me so gently through my darkest days, Beatrice replied, you weren't just helping me remember joy, you were becoming it. As the spring sun rose higher, bathing the ranch in golden light, Lucas and Beatrice stood together on the porch of the home they shared, arms entwined, hearts full with the promise of the life they were building, a life neither could have imagined a year before, but one that now stretched before them, as vast and beautiful as the Colorado sky above. In the years that followed, the Pearson ranch flourished, as did the family that called it home. Beatrice divided her time between teaching at the Durango school and caring for their growing family. Lucas expanded the cattle operation, his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Their first child, a son they named Edward after Beatrice's father, arrived on a stormy August night in 1880. He had his mother's golden hair and his father's steady temperament, a combination that served him well as he grew into a thoughtful, capable boy. 2 years later, twin daughters joined the family, Hannah and Rachel, identical in appearance with their father's dark hair, but utterly different in personality. Hannah was bold and adventurous, while Rachel possessed a quieter nature and a gift for music that reminded Beatrice of her mother. The nightmares that had once plagued Beatrice gradually faded, though she never forgot the trauma that had brought her to Lucas. Instead, she transformed that pain into purpose, establishing a fund for families affected by violence and working with the wives of railroad workers to improve living conditions in the camps. Lucas watched his wife's transformation with immense pride, marveling at how the broken woman he'd found wandering the plains had become not only the heart of their home but a respected figure in the community. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Lucas surprised Beatrice with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children, engraved with the words, "From darkness into joy." "To remind you of how far you've come," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, "and how much light you've brought into the world since that day." Beatrice touched the locket reverently, then looked up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I used to think my life ended the day Blackburn attacked our camp," she said softly. "Now I know it was just beginning. Every moment since the good and the difficult has been a gift I never expected to receive." As they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard where wildflowers now grew in carefully tended beds. Beatrice leaned into her husband's embrace. "Do you remember what you told me by the creek that day?" she asked. "About finding joy even after terrible loss?" Lucas nodded, his arm tightening around her waist. "I remember. You were right," she said simply. Joy doesn't erase the scars, but it makes them part of a larger story, one worth living, worth sharing. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in the same blood-red hues that had colored it the evening Lucas first spotted Beatrice. But now, instead of foreboding, the sunset represented completion, the closing of one day and the promise of another to follow. "I love you, Beatrice Pearson," Lucas said, the words as heartfelt as the first time he'd spoken them. "And I love you," she replied, her blue eyes clear and bright with the joy she had indeed remembered how to feel. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left together." As twilight settled over the ranch, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Lucas and Beatrice remained on the porch, their hands entwined, their hearts full, two people who had found in each other not just love, but healing, purpose, and a happiness deeper than either had dared to imagine possible.